So, bearing in mind we have a very, very full packed morning, I suggest that we start, and I would like to welcome you all, a very warm welcome. I am Judith Broll. I am the Director of Professional Development at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy, and I'm going to be co-chairing this event with my colleague Derek Munn. Sorry, I'm giving you a new name there. I think I'm so pleased to see so many people showing such interest in this piece of work. I'm really sorry about that. And I think what's really lovely is that we're pulling together different organisations and stakeholders into this space to really look at the opportunities for apprenticeships with speech and language therapy, because I think it's a really important thing to hear what's going on, to look at and hear the showcase pieces, and to support this important workforce transformation piece right across the country. So welcome to you all. I have been tasked, can I have the next slide please, Becca, with talking to you about housekeeping, which I think is important, especially as there's so many of you from so many different areas and across England. If you haven't done so already, could you please change your Zoom name by clicking on the 3 dots in the top right hand corner probably, just to include your name and the organisation, and this will function as your virtual delegate badge. Can I also make a gentle reminder that we'll be recording this presentation for this event, and it will also be available on the college website afterwards, so please do tell your colleagues. This has been a really oversubscribed day, so I'm sure that there'll be lots of people really interested in what's being said. Please do feel free to use the chat function at any point in the day. You can either message everyone or a specific presenter or staff member should that be needed. We love to see everybody's faces, and please do turn on your camera if you would like, but we also appreciate that some people don't like to show their face, and you can contribute in the chat box as well. Either is fine with us. We are appreciative it's a long time to sit and to listen, so you may leave and re-enter the event at any time, and please use the same link. You can come in and out as you please there, but we do hope that you stay with us and are able to contribute as we go along. If anybody has any access needs throughout the day, please could you have a word in the private chat with a member of the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy events team, and will be available usually as under RCSLT host, and they'll be able to accommodate your adjustments if possible. You should have received an email this morning with your virtual delegate pack, and it should have in that pack your presentation, all our biographies of the speakers, and the programme. If you haven't received it, please could you let Jasmine know in the chat box, and we can resend it to you so that you can have sight on what's going on. And then how can we not talk about Twitter? Please do tweet about what we're doing throughout the day, and if you could use the hashtag SLT Apprenticeship, we would be very grateful. As I've already mentioned, we have a fantastic group of staff from the events team at college to support us to make sure that this runs smoothly. And if you do have any questions, please do direct message them during the day. We are also really keen to hear of any other comments that you might like to share, and we've created a Jamboard, which I am reliably informed is also going to pop into the chat box as well. And that's really just to add any questions or comments, and it's a bit like, you know, the old-fashioned stickies on flip chart paper if we were in the real room. But please do use it, and that'd be really useful for us to capture any comments and learning for us going forward, and questions. As ever, I would like to just welcome your constructive comments, and would be really grateful if at the end of this week you could complete the evaluation sheet for us. And again, we will post that in the link later on. And please do take a few minutes to complete this, as we really value your feedback, and this really helps us plan any future events like this that we may have. We're now going, I think, to just do a very quick poll of the temperature check of where we all are in terms of how we feel about apprenticeships. So on your screen, you should now see, as if by magic, a poll appear. And it's just a sort of a warm up for us, just to see how you're feeling about this. Are you seeing it? Because I'm not, but then, oh yes, I am. I'm technologically, lots of thumbs up, thank you. If you wouldn't mind just filling that in. as we move on, trying to keep us to time. So while you submit, nice to see all these new things flying in about who you all are. So welcome to you all. I think you don't really need to hear any more from me. And what I would like to do now is to hand over to our first speakers, who are Elaine Lancaster, who is a Talent for Care Relationship Manager for Apprenticeships, sounds very grand, for the South East, and Jennifer Stone, who's Talent for Care Relationship Manager for Apprenticeships for London, both working for Health Education England. You can see most people are sitting on the fence about how confident you feel about starting it. We're hoping by the end of this, after hearing these two colleagues, it will be a much higher number. So thank you very much for that. Please keep adding. And if we could move on to the first presentation, please. Thank you. Over to you two.
So my name's Elaine Lancaster, as we've been introduced. My colleague Jenny will be along shortly, and we're here really to talk to you about Health Education England. I'm hoping you've all heard of HEE, and what the apprenticeship team do to support apprenticeships on the larger scale, but also what our support to you is as an employer or someone who is thinking about apprenticeships. The poll has been really interesting for me to see, in that it does seem there's quite a mix of where people are with their understanding of apprenticeships and understanding of the SLT apprenticeship in particular. So we're hoping through this presentation, as one of the things that we're doing today, that you'll be a little bit closer to understanding what apprenticeships are, the sort of ins and outs of them, the value of them, more importantly. And perhaps by the end of this session, you might not be ready to do an SLT apprenticeship or be in a position to think about an SLT apprenticeship. But if you've thought about this and thought, there are other apprenticeships I could bring into my team, or I could use to bring my team on to get ready, come and talk to me and Jenny about what we can do to support you. Could I have the next slide, please? So we call ourselves the apprenticeship team. As well as me and Jenny, there is a relationship manager for every NHS E&I region, which are now replicated by the HEE regions. And we sit within the wider Talent for Care team. So Talent for Care within HEE is really about addressing that widening participation agenda. And for us, widening participation is about recruiting a workforce or ensuring that the workforce you've got represents the community that it serves. So apprenticeships sit in there as a way of bringing in new staff to the NHS, as a way of upskilling existing staff. But within Talent for Care, we've also got volunteering, work experience. Some of you are probably hearing about traineeships. They're getting a lot of extra attention as part of the COVID economic recovery. T-levels, which is going to be a new post-18 qualification coming into healthcare at the start of the next academic year. As well as within the apprenticeship team, we also look at how we can get people into higher level and degree level apprenticeships, which are vital for that workforce transformation piece. Can we have the next slide, please? So, as well as supporting you as the employer with apprenticeships, I'm not sure how many people are aware, but HE do actually get directly involved in the development of apprenticeships, from us doing things like us as the RMs, talking to you as employers, saying, what do you need at the moment? What demand is there? If there's a gap in the apprenticeship market, we will support you and support a Trailblazer group to develop new apprenticeships. And apprenticeships are very much employer-led. That's one of the key points about them, and how we support you as employers to get the apprenticeship provision that you need is a really important part of our job. Another thing that you might not be aware of is that there is a public sector target. So all organisations in scope should have 2.3% of their workforce enrolled as an apprenticeship, which equates to 28,000 people. So in 18-19, we achieved 83% of that target. The NHS is actually one of the biggest contributors of apprenticeships to the public sector target, which is something I think we should be really proud about. If we can have the next slide, please. So there's also a huge range of healthcare apprenticeships available. Obviously, we're here today to talk about the speech and language therapist apprenticeship, but maybe there might be things in the background that you think, oh, maybe we can use a different apprenticeship to develop at staff, or there might be a non-clinical apprenticeship that you might be interested in. I'd like to see if there's anything that you think should be an apprenticeship that isn't an apprenticeship. We'd like to hear about it because we think we've got a lot of bases covered. Next slide, please. So this is a really interesting one about apprenticeships in 1920. Just to let you know, when we talk about these dates, these are academic year dates rather than financial year dates. Now, if you have a look, it's a bit hard to see this slide probably, but if you have a look at what the top 20 apprenticeship starts were in the NHS in 1920, you can probably see that there's a really good mix of clinical and non-clinical, and a mixture of lots of levels, from advanced apprenticeships to the more entry-level apprenticeships. For me, it's really interesting. Nursing associate was the most popular start, and that's because there's a lot of political attention around that. But also, this has been a real success in terms of using an apprenticeship to introduce a new role. The widening participation impact of the makeup of people who've done an apprenticeship has also been incredible. And I don't think we would have got those numbers that we've got if it wasn't an apprenticeship. If it had to be self-funded, like another degree route, I don't think we'd be at the size that we are. I also think it's really interesting that the second most popular one is a business admin apprenticeship. And this is a really popular entry route for people into the NHS, and an entry route that might lead to a clinical role further down the line. But it's incredibly popular and a really valuable way that people can get a start in the NHS and learn about NHS organisations. If we could have the next slide, please. So here's a little bit about the speech and language therapist degree apprenticeship standard. I know this is going to be dealt with by Bernice later on, so we just did the highlights. So the qualification that you come out with is a BSc. It's exactly the same BSc as if you came out if you self-funded. If you've already it can also be post-reg MSc in speech and language therapy at level 7. Again, exactly the same as if you self-funded. It's also an integrated apprenticeship. This might be a bit too much detail for some of you on the call, but essentially the endpoint assessment is included in the standard. So there isn't any additional parts at the end. Funding band, every apprenticeship has a funding band of £25,000. Can you just go back to one slide? Thank you. Everyone has a funding band, and that's the cost per year. This apprenticeship standard has been recognised by the HCPC, so if someone successfully completes this, they can register with the HCPC. And the duration, whenever you look at any standard, is the minimum you must take to do this apprenticeship, or the minimum it's been recognised to fulfil this apprenticeship. We often say it's about 48 months. For maths and English, it's a standard that you need to obtain functional skills level 2, maths or English, before you get to the end point. If you haven't got that already and you're thinking about potential speech and language therapists, that's something we would encourage you to think about now, and we'll pick that up later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So some of you might not really work in apprenticeships, so we thought it was worth explaining how the Apprenticeship Levy works. In the simplest terms, it's a tax that all employers over a certain size pay into, but all of those employers who pay in also get money out. So the Apprenticeship Levy, as you can see, goes to the NHS is over £200 million a year. That is not loose change. It's a lot of money that we've got to be better about spending. Another issue with the Apprenticeship Levy is that it does expire after 24 months. So money will go into your account in January on a monthly basis, almost like a salary. But if you don't spend it after 24 months, it gets taken back into Treasury funds, allegedly to support further apprenticeships, but we've never really bottomed that out. So spend your money. And the levy is only to pay for the academic fees related to the course. You can't use it for backfill. You can't use it to buy books or other support materials. It's literally just for the course fees. Another thing about the apprenticeship levy that I think we're not making the most of is you can transfer unspent levy to other non-levy paying organisations in your supply chain. So I think with speech and language therapy in particular, this could be a really useful one to look at how we support the sort of wider non-NHS organisations that might be interested in using this. So next slide, please. Again, this is just a bit more detail about how you pay for your training. Again, most of you, I think, on this call will use the apprenticeship levy. If we've got non-levy payers, there are two other routes that means that you still don't pay, or you don't pay the bulk of it, which again, if you're one of those organisations, pick it up with us at HEE and we can cover that for you. Next slide, please. So we thought, again, these are some of the benefits of apprenticeships. If you think about apprenticeships as just another form of workforce development, or CPPD, that you've got a big pot of cash to spend, how would you approach workforce development? Workforce development is a way of attracting new staff. It's a way of developing existing staff and dealing with some of the recruitment and retention issues. Apprenticeships can be great in supporting new roles. The nursing associate is a perfect example of that. We've got other new roles coming out as well that will be really supported by an apprenticeship, a psychological wellbeing practitioner, for example. And it's also, apprenticeships can be a driver for whole system organisation development, in that you can have a consistent approach to developing a role and a career and the people doing those roles. Next slide, please. So again, this is just a slide for you to come back to at a later point about how to use apprenticeships to grow and develop your team. The most important step at the beginning is actually, what's your workforce need? What are your gaps? Can you think about filling this with an apprenticeship? Do you have either relevant people, or do you think about where you could recruit them? Step 2 is also important. If you're an SLT lead, get in touch with your apprenticeship lead within your organisation or your trust. Again, relationship managers can support you. Really, you need to track down who looks after your apprenticeship pot and your apprenticeship levy. We've already covered the funding. Procurement, you always need to procure a provider, but again, we're here to help you with that, and Jenny will tell you about that shortly. And again, the next steps are just as if you were recruiting a non-apprentice, so you need to advertise or identify and think about how you're going to support that new member of staff. Next slide, please. So another really valuable thing about apprenticeships for me is that you can build an entire career pathway, either for someone coming in at the beginning of their career to all the way up to sort of working at advanced level 7. So we've got here either examples of pathways from top to bottom, or if you've got people who are in the sort of middle of their career, what you can do to support them. If we can have the next slide, here is a slide specifically about an AHP workforce. So you could have someone that comes and joins you as a healthcare support worker. They do that apprenticeship at level 2, move on to a level 3 qualification, then look at an assistant practitioner foundation degree, then go on to the SLT degree, and then the ACP degree. You could spend your entire lifetime doing apprenticeships for your career development, or you can step in at any of these points, which is one of the magic of apprenticeships for me. So I'm going to hand over to Jenny now, who's going to take you through a few more facts about apprenticeships and what HE can do to support you. We can have the next slide, please.
Hi, thank you, Elaine. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jenny Stone, and like Elaine, I'm the Apprenticeship Relationship Manager in the Talent for Care team at Health Education England, covering the London region, but as Elaine said, there's one of us in every region. Just to touch on the procurement, Elaine mentioned this, but procurement is needed for procuring apprenticeships. Reason for that is it is public money. Even though it's the apprenticeship levy, it's tax, but you do have to procure for all apprenticeships. So we work in partnership with Salisbury Procurement Managed Services, where there are DPS and procurement frameworks. I'm not going to go into great detail, could be here all day to talk about that. But it's around the fact that, you know, trusts and small employees, because I've seen a few comments in the chat. Obviously, we know that you're not all NHS, but it talks about financial thresholds and things like that. The reason we do national procurement is to sort of stimulate the market so that we have enough providers to deliver the procurement, for the apprenticeship standards. And when we do the procurement, we look at the delivery model that the HEI is offering. Is it block release? Is it day release? And Elaine and I and the rest of our team are here to look at scoping viable cohort numbers to ensure these courses can run. Next slide, please. I sort of mentioned this, but the advantages of doing a national procurement is around the viable numbers. We have one set of tender documents that the HEIs have to complete, so you're not filling it out well, potentially 250 odd times if you're doing it per trust or per employer. We evaluate the bids with employers, and therefore it can be quicker, but also we have the experts, so we reach out to those of you that are on the call, speech and language experts. The procurement is open to all public sectors, so anyone on the call that isn't necessarily NHS would be able to access this procurement as well. Next slide, please. Collaborative approach, really important. Elaine touched on this earlier, but workforce planning, we cannot stress enough. We need to look at, you need to start at the beginning, existing workforce, new entrants, or you're going to have a mix of both. That's the first point of all of this. Involve subject matter experts at the start, and make sure that you link in with your apprenticeship lead. Even if you're not NHS, then you will have some sort of apprenticeship lead, even if it's a local council or whatever it is, there will be somebody in the organisation that looks after apprenticeships. When we're evaluating, we're looking at the programme length and what does that programme look like. Next slide, please. This is just a step through of that process. I won't go through all of it due to time, but it sort of like starts off about collating numbers that will be within regions, and then we'll add them nationally. And this includes all of NHS, health and social care, primary care, and then, the tender goes out. And then finally, we, once all of this is done, we award contracts, or Salisbury award the contract. Really important to say that Salisbury are the people that sort of own the contract and the awards. Next slide, please. Okay, responsibilities for employers. We're going to touch on a lot of this, to be honest, in the workshops a bit later on. So it's just making sure that everything's in place, including salary, and liaising with training providers on a regular basis and having a suitable mentor. But as I say, please do. As I say, we're talking about this in the workshops a bit later anyway. Next slide, please. Just wanted to touch on off the job. People, there's a lot of confusion over off the job. An apprenticeship must have a minimum of 20% off the job, but this slide gives you some other examples of what can be included in off the job. So yes, they do go to university, possibly 1 day a week or block release. But while they're in the workplace, all of these things that are on here can be counted towards their off the job that needs to be recorded, but that would be with help from the training provider. Next slide, please. We just wanted to let you know about our offer with functional skills. We have paid for and have access to a BKSB software, which gives English and maths and ITC, so digital skills, to the opportunity for staff to upskill if they need to in English and maths. And we're also piloting something at the moment with functional skills exams. So we're offering end-to-end around apprenticeship functional skills to get people ready to join the apprenticeship. Next slide, please. Something else we also offer is, again, we've funded a licence, and we have access to the UK ENIC database. So if any of your candidates have overseas qualifications, then absolutely we can run those qualifications through NARIC was NARIC, now ENIC, changed their name on the 1st of March. So some of you would know it as NARIC. And we can get the equivalency of their GCSE A to C, which may mean they don't need to do their functional skills. Next slide, please. As we've mentioned, there are another another 5 of us. My goodness, I need more coffee. And there's all of us there listed with the regions and our email addresses. So please do lead out to us. But again, please contact your internal apprenticeship lead. Next slide, please. Bit of a plug, but also not just a plug, just this website. We cannot stress enough. The information in here gives you everything you need to know about healthcare apprenticeships. It is hosted by Skills for Health, but a lot of the content in there is from us within Health Education England, and we work in partnership with them. There's business cases in there. There's all sorts of information, including the functional skills and the NARIC information and case studies and all sorts, and the pathway tool is in there as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So sorry, apologies for rushing through, but yeah, there's so much information and support that we can give you, that we had many slides, but you can all go through them, and please do contact us if you want to. I can see a question quickly, just one. No functional skills are equivalent to GCSE. So level 2 functional skills are equivalent to an A to C GCSE, but we can pick that up a bit later, maybe in the workshop, in your workshop. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you all. That was fascinating. What a font of knowledge you all have, and thank you so much for the offer to get in touch. I'm sure many people on this workshop definitely will be. So thank you so much for that. And without further ado, can I move on now and introduce you to Berenice Napier, who is Policy Advisor at Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy and has really been instrumental in getting us to where we are now from a professional body. So can I hand over to you now, Berenice? Thank you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see so many of you here this morning. Have the next slide, please. Thank you. So RCSLT have been involved right from the very start, as you can see, in 2017, in the development of the apprenticeship, and as have a group of SLTs and universities, and we all work together on the Trailblazer group to develop the standard and the endpoint assessment. And with that standard having been approved in 2019, we're now at a really important crossroads, if you like, in implementing the apprenticeship. So some universities and some employers have already been sort of discussing informally how the apprenticeship could work. And we've also continued to work really closely with the former Trailblazer group to develop some RCSLT guidance. But the most important step that needs to happen next is for employers and universities to come together and make some, firm commitments to starting. And so from the employer side, you'll need to clear your own internal hurdles and make commitments to employ apprentices. And HEIs will need to do the same in terms of their own processes to set up a new course. But one can't happen without the other. So we're in a sort of a chicken and egg situation at the moment. So our key aim today is to help employers progress your thinking and your decision making about the apprenticeship, and to encourage you to make contacts in your regions to help take that forwards. And I think just one reflection I have on the whole process so far is, the enthusiasm for the apprenticeship has been there right from the start. I can assure you a week does not go by when we don't receive inquiries from prospective apprentices about when it can start. So I hope we can take some of the next steps today. So can I have the next slide, please? So this one's about sort of RCSLT support for the degree apprenticeship. I think we've been very clear right from the start that an apprenticeship, it has to be of the same standard and the same quality as the traditional university route. That means it has to provide at least a degree level qualification, align with HCPC standards and RCSLT's own curriculum guidance. So I've put the links in the slides to all of those things so that you'll be able to look through in due course. The slides will be available afterwards. So the RCSLT guidance, I'm going to do a bit of a plug here, pulls together lots and lots of useful links and information from lots of different places. So I'd recommend that you take a look through it. The apprenticeship standard. Obviously the apprenticeships, as they are developed by universities, they will need to also align with the apprenticeship standard. That standard was actually based on RCSLT's curriculum guidance from 2018. So we hope that alignment will be relatively, smooth, and everyone can see where those links are. So for RCSLT, this is a really important new route into the profession. So it's one that will allow a more flexible pathway. For example, we have many talented SLT assistants who are not always able to take a break from employment to study full time. We also hope the apprenticeship will provide a route through which apprentices from local communities will be able to train and study without moving away. So potentially important to help you with your local recruitment problems. We also hope it will contribute to providing a route to improving the diversity of the profession. And I think that's something HEE already touched on earlier. So we also know many SLTs come to the profession as mature students, and an apprenticeship potentially provides that route for people who find SLT later in their life, and so they can join the profession too, often with that valuable experience that they bring from their previous working life. So the next slide, please. So this slide is to give you an overview of what an apprenticeship would look like. I'm not going to read out all of it, but in particular, I'd like to draw out that this apprenticeship is not going to be easy for an apprentice. Apprentices will be undertaking robust academic learning at the same time as working. So they're going to need really good support from their employer and the university. There'll need to be really excellent communication, and as SLTs, I know you're going to do that, between HEI, the employer and apprentice, to provide that guidance and that feedback and the development and the mentorship that the apprentice is going to need. I think it's also really important from a wellbeing point of view that an apprentice is going to need study time that's separate from the academic learning time. So it'll be important to build that in. And just one last point to highlight, that placements for an apprentice will need a sort of a different organisation to that you might be more familiar with the traditional student. We think apprentices are likely to need some sort of rotation between employers to ensure that they're able to experience the whole range of different settings that RCSLT's guidance requires. So thank you. Next slide. So there's a few tips for getting started. So I've already mentioned the need to think about the apprenticeship, both in terms of your own organisations and the internal agreements that you will need to secure to be able to go ahead with it. So do you know who your apprenticeship lead is in your trust if you're in the NHS? If you're in a local authority, there may also be an apprentice lead already. For those of you in independent practice, I guess you may be your own apprenticeship lead, but perhaps you'll have fewer hurdles in that respect at least. So you'll have already realised that in one even large organisation, there may only be 1 or 2 SLT apprentices a year. So that's the reason I think there's also the need to think about building a picture of regional demand for SLT apprentices, so that universities know that there is a demand for the next few years for the apprenticeship in your region. So as you've already heard, HEE can help support your ICS or your STP, your AHP council, and even your AHP faculties might all be thinking about workforce education or work and support structures that you can join. So if you're thinking about those regional structures, ensure you think more widely than just your NHS colleagues. We want all parts of the system that employ SLTs to be involved. And lastly, just to touch on ensuring that the apprentice can get the broad placement experiences they need. An SLT apprentice will need to experience both the adult and children settings as traditional students do. So in the second workshop today, there will be a chance to sort of discuss how that might possibly work, how a rotation might work around different placements in your region. Thank you. Next slide, please. So it's important to take the time to explore all those options with universities, but at some point I think both parties need to make that commitment. Also really important to see if you do have assistants in particular who might be interested. We've had numerous inquiries from them, and RCSLT has presented to assistance groups and the SENS on more than one occasion about this, and there was a lot of enthusiasm. So now is the time to check whether they have the likely entry qualifications. Those entry qualifications very likely to be the same as for the traditional degree, given the academic nature of the work required to obtain that degree. So that would be A levels or BTEC equivalent normally. And I think we have a few universities on the workshop, so please take the opportunity to ask questions. Lastly, RCSLT has set up a new forum on our professional network to come together and share questions and information about how you're developing the apprenticeship. So if you're an RCSLT member, you can join. I think we provide the link on the next screen. So if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just so key messages, we hope this event will provide you the food for thought for those of you who are not sure what the next steps are. RCSLT is really happy to join any regional meetings that follow this event and to help with that further discussion. So please do join the new apprenticeship discussion forum via the RCSLT website. We think it'll be a really great way for you to share your solutions and the issues that you need help with going forward. So just lastly, I think as a small profession, getting the apprenticeship off the ground has its own unique challenges, but I hope that by working together, these can be overcome. And the thing I'm most looking forward to is seeing the day when the first SLT apprentices start their degree. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Berenice. I think that's really helpful. I mean, the themes are coming through loud and clear. There's so much enthusiasm in so many sectors and interest not just from the contributors today, and also there's such a lot of support and knowledge out there already. I think these are really interesting and powerful themes coming through. At which point I would like to hand over to some colleagues who have got some first-hand experience of working as the role of the employer with these apprenticeship posts. So I'd like to introduce you to Carmel Brady, speech and language therapist and lead for children's services, Your Healthcare CIC. Michelle Humphrey, Deputy Head of Therapies and Professional Lead for Speech and Language Therapy at Bart's NHS Trust, and Deirdre Rainbow, Head of Speech and Language Therapy at King's College NHS Foundation Trust. So may I hand over to you colleagues now.
Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you, Judith, for that introduction. My name is Carmel, and along with my comrades Michelle and Deirdre, we're going to talk you through the role that you play as the employer when it comes to considering an SLT apprentice. Now, Michelle, Deirdre and myself, we've been involved in the Trailblazer group and in the journey from the start in 2017. And we're very, very keen to see the apprenticeship into its implementation. So we hope that what we've got to share with you today will help you on your journey as you begin to consider taking on an apprentice. So next slide, please. So we're going to cover a lot of the points that have been made already this morning, but just look at them in a bit more detail. And also you will have an opportunity in the workshops coming up this morning to explore these in a bit more detail. So as already mentioned, one of the starting points to consider is getting internal agreement in your organisation. No matter how big or how small, or whether you're NHS, social enterprise, private entity, it doesn't matter. It's about getting agreement with your colleagues or your organisation about taking on an apprentice and making the business case for this. Now, 2 points that we feel are a good foundation in making the business case are both diversity that an apprenticeship can bring and how an apprentice can fit in with your integrated system, which I'll expand on in a moment. So firstly, in thinking about diversity, drawing on an already working population can often widen the pool for both gender and ethnicity, as opposed to the route of school to university. And as already mentioned, the SLT degree apprenticeship is no different in standard to going to university. It's just that it's a different route and opens up opportunities for people who may not have the experience to go to university from school. Also, you will be drawing on people who are already working and have many life experiences, many of which may include experiences of health and social care services, either from a personal level, from a friend, a partner, a relation, or someone in their community. We also know, as Berenice mentioned, that apprenticeships can open the door more widely for not only our own SLT assistants, but assistants across the board, including healthcare assistants. Because currently there's not a formal structure for an assistant qualification, and if they want to progress into a degree, this could be a nice route for them to do that. And in areas where it can be hard to recruit or potentially hard to retain staff, well then an apprenticeship may support those challenges that organisations have. So in effect, you could be looking at a local workforce that it has a high probability of staying in your organisation. So the integrated care system, if you haven't already heard of this, is the new recommendation from the government about bringing health and care services together within a particular area to provide seamless services. So again, if you're a small enterprise or an independent practitioner, tapping into the footprint in your area is a good idea. There's a good chance that the ICS in your area has a strategy around workforce and recruitment. And as already mentioned, particularly in the hard to recruit areas, so it's worthwhile to work out some contacts in your ICS. Again, tap into your apprenticeship lead. There will be someone around who's already averse with apprenticeships in your area. And finally, it's probably worth thinking about how your organisation is managing the apprenticeship from a financial perspective. Certainly in our organisation, it started with, it was only going to be for assistants. That was the route they were going to support, but they have now moved to making it supernumerary and funding the costs for any clinical apprenticeship within the organisation. So as I said, we'll explore these cases a bit more in the workshop. And now I'd like to hand you over to Michelle.
Thank you, Carmel, and good morning, everybody. So just following on from what Carmel has shared, I think the key point that Carmel and Dee and I would like you to leave today with is understanding that when thinking about a speech and language therapy apprenticeship, we're thinking about working in partnership and in collaboration with colleagues in our surrounding area. And in order for this to be successful, what we need to do as employers and independent employers is to work in collaboration and in partnership with those people who are around us in order to create our future workforce, but in particular, to be able to provide the range, the depth, and the quality of placement experience using some of the learning that we've had from our undergraduate and postgraduate traditional training routes, really to package that up in terms of how do we offer this for our apprenticeship colleagues. Just reflecting on something that Berenice mentioned a moment ago, she said chicken and egg, it's a chicken and egg situation. And as organisations and as our higher education institutions, there's something really key here about working in as a partnership, a collaboration, so that we can move forward to provide the best learning opportunities for these colleagues and for our future workforce. One of the things that you will need to do as an employing body and working within the ICS that Carmel has just introduced us to is to identify our neighbouring local partners who we might work with, our local higher education institutions who may be interested in offering the speech and language therapy apprenticeship. And what's really key here is not to forget those colleagues who work in independent practice, be that in a care home setting, a school setting, a social enterprise, colleagues who might be linked directly with GP surgeries, and those who might be working in independent hospital sectors as well. Also thinking about those who might be working in social care settings as well. So really to think quite diversely about who one might link up with, along with the apprenticeship leads for each of those respective organisations. Some of the learning that Carmel and Dee and I are sharing this morning is linked with our associations with other apprenticeships for other allied health professional groups that are now off the ground. And for my own part, I've had particular engagement with both occupational therapy and physiotherapy, and certainly am bringing some of that learning into how do we, as an organisation going forward, think about bringing in speech and language therapy into that. And one of the things that was really key to that was to start those conversations as early as possible to link in with our HEIs so that we had a shared recruitment process and to really to understand the academic requirements and the future academic load. This is a difficult course, it's a challenging academic course, and what we want to do as employers and HEIs is to be able to work in partnership to support not only the successful recruitment of a speech and language therapy apprenticeship workforce, also a successful qualification of a speech and language therapy apprenticeship. And there's various ways we can do that, and certainly working in linking in with Health Education England is a part of that. The fact that you're all here today is fabulous. I think that's an indication of not only the interest that there is in speech and language therapy as an apprenticeship, but all being well, many of the employers that are represented here are people who are particularly interested in thinking about, well, how might we move forwards in thinking about having some of these colleagues as part of our workforce. There will equally be as many employers out there who may want to take a step back, maybe less enthusiastic, a little bit more sceptical about how we might move forward in creating this opportunity. One of the learnings that certainly I've been part of is that this is very much linked to your organisational priorities in terms of workforce, and linking those initial apprenticeships perhaps to where there are some challenges around both recruitment and retention to particular professional groups. Within speech and language therapy, I think we have the opportunity there to really create something that provides the beginning of a career pathway that both Jenny and Elaine referred to earlier. A natural place for some of these partnerships to be would be within the ICS. Another place I would suggest that people to think about as well within the ICS is our allied health professional councils. Some of these are in their infancy in your local geographical areas. It's certainly worth linking in with your organisational allied health professional lead to see what adjuncts there could be using that route to really to support not only us as a unidisciplinary group, but to understand what across our allied health professional groups we could take on to support this and get things started for our speech and language therapy future apprenticeship workforce. In terms of linking in, just to share one example, you undoubtedly, those people who are representing services here, will be linked into perhaps some of your local management forums or some of your local special interest groups in your area. It may well be that that is a really valuable opportunity to think about how could we start these conversations. As an example, Carmel and Dee and myself are linked in with one particular group, and back in September 2018, we commenced a discussion with colleagues really just to bring them up to date with where we were in working through the Trailblazer standard process. And two of us were able to facilitate a discussion prior to which the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists had shared a briefing. Since 2018, we've had the topic of apprenticeships on our agenda each time that we've met. And that's really to strengthen that debate, that discussion, and to start to think as early as possible about how we might network so that in part we can provide these opportunities for this rounded placement such that we meet the standards that have been set for the Trailblazer and the apprenticeship standard, and also so that we can network and we can link and we can work collaboratively to support one another in this early part of our journey. One of the things that we recognise with that local group is that we don't have access to private practices. We do open that group up to not-for-profit organisations, but we are working through how do we ensure that we engage our private practitioners in this as well, our independent practitioners. In a moment, I'm just going to hand over to Dee. I'm not going to say anything more about virtual meetings. We're doing that here and now, but really to pull on those opportunities that you may already have locally in your area. You may already have a regular link with your higher education institutions. You may already have those partnerships and links and meetings and forums with colleagues in surrounding organisations. It's really thinking about flexibly how we might use that as an opportunity to start those conversations and work, as I said, collaboratively to move forward with the apprenticeship journey. I'll hand over to Dee now and look forward to talking together with some people in our workshops later this morning.
Good morning. You're on the home straight now before the refreshment break. It's only 10 minutes, but you might get a little bit longer if I'm swift. So I'm going to talk about selecting the apprentice, and obviously we're a long way off that at the moment, but we do need to start the discussions. And I think, as Michelle and Carmel both alluded to, networking is absolutely key to this. If you have local physio or OT colleagues or colleagues from other professions, but the obvious ones to go to are OT and physio colleagues, they've probably already recruited to their level 6 degree apprenticeships. Some of them are on their second cohort. So go and talk to them, find out about their experiences. They will be commissioning those places from a different HEI than we are likely to, but that's okay because those standards are in place to protect the apprentice and to protect the employer, to make sure we are delivering something that's fit for purpose. So they will have gone through lots of those pitfalls that we would fall into if we don't talk to them. And just incidentally, if you're thinking about any other kind of apprenticeship, do talk to your colleagues as well. So for instance, if you're thinking about a level 3 apprenticeship for assistance entry, then OT and physio and probably nursing are very, very well versed in that. And just to give a shout out in terms of selecting an apprentice for something else from within your own workforce, we've got a band 8 in our organisation, speech and language therapists, doing a level 5 leadership and management apprenticeship over 18 months. And 2 of my colleagues who are heads of therapies are doing MBAs through the apprenticeship route. So just remember, the apprenticeship route is really broad. I think we saw that at the beginning from Elaine and Jenny, but it is really broad. We're focusing today on SLT entry level, but if you start to embrace apprenticeships as a whole and talk to people about how they're using them, you'll feel more confident. I certainly feel a lot more confident having gone through having a level 3 assistant apprenticeship and learning quite a lot from that. And many services are actually doing lots and lots of apprenticeships. So lots of services, particularly exacerbated by the recent pandemic, the current pandemic, are reviewing their skill mixes. So you will see increasing numbers of apprentices coming on board for OT and physio, both at level 3 and at level 6, as they're trying to work out how they're going to get their stable workforce for the future. So first thing is talk to them. The next thing is thinking about recruiting from your local community. So Carmel beautifully touched on wanting to have a diverse workforce. Our workforce should reflect our local population. In turn, that's going to give us better stability because local staff will stay local, or local staff will remain in the area because they know they can actually work for a living wage, particularly somewhere like London, inner city London and outer London where my services are based. And it's really attractive for some of the specialities that we know are harder to recruit to. So, you know, some areas find it difficult in, say, learning difficulties or mental health services, but lots of us are experiencing challenges with the higher bands. So I work in a big acute hospital. I can get a band 5, no problem. Most of those band 5s become my band 6s. No problem. But when we start to get to 7s, people are moving out of London, they're wanting a different lifestyle, and they're not available. Whereas if I start off from a recruitment of apprentice basis, I'm hoping those people are the people who grew up locally and will stay locally. So think about recruiting internally. Not just from your speech and language therapy assistant pool. I've only got one assistant out of 50-something staff, so I don't have a big pool, though I hope she's not on today, but my assistant will ultimately go for the degree level apprenticeship, but across your organisation. So it may be there are people sitting in your business and admin team, the healthcare assistants, rehab assistants, support workers of any nature. Lots of places are only recruiting internally. And that's, again, going to give you a bit more diversity and inclusion. I think one of the worries is that we're going to recruit externally and we're going to get lots of graduates who want to become speech and language therapists, and this is a more affordable option to do it. But actually we want that diversity. We want school leavers, but we also want people who maybe left school without going on to further education, who've got lots of life experiences, and you will have that in your organisation. So very much think about recruiting internally. Use your equality, diversity and inclusion team. They're a really fantastic source of support. So an organisation like mine, any band 7 post has to go internal recruitment before it hits external. And if we have people applying internally, we can't recruit externally until we've exhausted that internal pool, so that there isn't a glass ceiling. And I think that's something we need to be very mindful of. And if you're having trouble with that, your EDI team will help you. If you're looking at recruiting across and sharing your apprentice across a number of organisations, as we've talked about, and most places will need to do that. I can think of very few organisations who can provide both paediatric and adult, and say some voice, some stammering, some mental health or learning disability. Obviously, things like the justice system is very big, and I know many more people working in the prison service. So if you're doing it across organisations, your HR department will take you through all the ups and downs of contracting. So don't be put off by that. Again, start to make friends with them. I'm sure we're doing this in other areas. The final thing is, and lots of people have put on the chat about the academic qualifications to get in to do this course. And I think that's going to be something that's going to keep coming up, and we will be refining over time. But one of the big learning points from our OT and physio colleagues on many of our organisations has been that we might identify rehab assistants, speech therapy assistants, admin team, who we think would make fantastic clinical speech and language therapists. But we're not the education experts. Yes, we supervise students. Yes, we recommend our staff for academic courses with our HEI colleagues, but they are the experts. And so when you recruit, you do have to do this in collaboration with your HEI, so that we're not offering a post and then the HEI is saying, actually, we don't think that candidate has the academic skills at the moment to be able to complete this course successfully. Because obviously we're all wanting any apprentice we recruit to be successful and to see this through to the end. We know that there are issues around undergraduate and postgraduate attrition from courses. And so not everybody who gets one of the precious places finishes. We don't want to see that in apprenticeships. These are our often our own staff that we want to look out for and look after. We don't want to upset them by saying, yes, you can go on the apprenticeship, and then the HEI say, well, we have some concerns. So always make sure that you work with them in terms of recruitment, and then you'll avoid disappointment for all, and any damage to your organisation's reputation and people leaving. We need to look after those staff and make sure they're the right people, and help to develop those who aren't quite there yet to be our apprentices of the future, because this isn't a flash in the pan. We've been working on this since 2017, maybe earlier. I've lost track of the years after the last 12 months, and we want this to be the route of the future and to succeed. It's not going away. If you think, oh, well, we'll never have to do this, your organisation will be wanting you to do this. They're paying that levy. As Elaine said, that's our money. We need to claim that and use that. So talk to your HEIs, talk to your EDI colleagues, talk to your physio colleagues, your OT colleagues, anyone you can find that will listen to you and talk about apprenticeships. We hope that Michelle, Carmel and I's enthusiasm has helped you to think, yes, we could do this. We've given you a little bit of practical advice. There'll be loads more to come in the next couple of years as we learn. We're very happy to be contacted if you want any help. None of us have got our apprenticeships off the ground yet, so just to be clear about that, we're all sitting in this funny place, and we hope that from today this will move things forward in our local areas. And I really look forward to seeing what we do. And as I keep saying to Berenice, we'll have an apprentice before I retire. December 2022 is when I'm retiring, so it'd be great to see it absolutely up and running by then, which I think we can do as a profession. Thank you. You get your coffee break, I think, but I'll let Judith say when we're allowed that or not.
Thank you, Dee, and thank you all. Gosh, that is a line in the sand indeed, isn't it? But I think that was fascinating as ever. This has been a morning full of information and also really positive opportunities. I think once again we're hearing collaboration, talking to people who've done it before, learning from those who've gone before, and also really knowing that we are not alone in this, and to work together. And in the bigger, it's macro and micro, isn't it? It's working out where your ICSs are, but also working out who your local colleagues in this space. And that's something we're going to look at later in our smaller regional groups. I'm sure we will all appreciate a break and to go and get some coffee and just let things percolate as we go through. We now have until 10:50 to go and have a think and a break. We would ask you if you could just put turn your screen off during that time, and then when we come back, my colleague Derek Munn, Director of Policy and Public Affairs, will be leading the next sessions. But thank you all very much for your time, for all the speakers and their knowledge and sharing their skills and information with us. And we look forward to seeing you at 10:50. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. I hope all of the groups were as constructive as the East Midlands, where I was, where we were having an extremely useful time. My job now is simply to introduce us into the next session, the role of the HEI and working with employers. We've got two mini presentations within this. And first up, I'd like to introduce Julie Latkovich, who is Principal Lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University. Julie, over to you.
Thank you. I don't know whether anybody can see me. I think people might just be able to still see you, Derek, but that's lovely.
I can see you, Julie, but who can say?
Oh, that's great. That's great then. So I'm Julie Latkovich. I work at Manchester Metropolitan University, and I've been part of the Trailblazer group. And in this next session, myself, Victoria and Annabelle and some of her colleagues from Essex are just going to talk about how we see our role as the HEI working with employers, on the understanding that the apprenticeship by its very nature is absolutely an employer-led initiative, but we're going to be talking about how we can support you in that and our willingness to work with you. Could I have the next slide, please? So just this first slide just to orient us all to what the role of the HEI is in this endeavour to support the apprenticeship. We are responsible for the design of programmes that meet the standards needed so that people who successfully graduate can apply for registration with HCPC and become full college members after their NQP time. So we make sure that the way the programme is designed meets all those standards, both the curriculum guidance and the standards of education and training, the SETs, and the standards of proficiency, the SOPs, from HCPC. We already have a range of different ways of doing that. So our traditional BSc 3 years or 4 years, we have integrated MSc programmes now that are 4 years and lead to a master's. We have accelerated master's programmes that take 2 years. And we now have the apprenticeship route that, depending on whether it's level 6 or level 7, might take between 2 and 4 years. Now that's a broad brushstroke, and it really depends on the way that programme is designed. So typically for a BSc taking people with A-level or equivalent qualifications, it would take 4 years to do that. If it's the MSc programme, it would take less time, but there is some flexibility within that. So what the apprenticeship will do is allow an apprentice to study at degree level or MSc level, so that when they finish that programme of study, they're ready for the qualified Band 5 role. Within that, the standard that we have had approved says a minimum of 20% of the working week will be about the learning delivered by the HEI. We're also very much aware that our apprentices will have additional consolidation work to do, which might be about them preparing for their assessments. It might be doing some additional reading, etc. So there may be periods of time where they need that additional 20% for independent study. That wouldn't have to be necessarily delivered on a weekly basis, nor would the 20% of learning for the HEI. There are different models that could be considered there, and I think Annabelle might pick that up later. But generally, we're expecting between 60+% to be on-job working, and they'd be working in their apprenticeship role that you've appointed them to, and you know, very often that's going to be an SLTA role. Could I move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So just looking at those two routes and how they differ, entry qualifications aren't very different, but what we might expect to see in the apprenticeship route is that equivalence of A-levels rather than A-levels is more prominent. We're keen that, you know, we do have to keep to that same standard, and we know that there's a lot of academic work involved in a speech and language therapy degree programme across a wide range from science right through to arts and phonetics and linguistics, psychology. So we do need these apprentices to be ready for that learning, and that protects them and supports their progress. One of the biggest differences is in the amount of time they'll actually be exposed to clinical practice and be within your departments. So within a traditional BSc, it's a minimum recommendation of 525 hours across the 3-year programme, and that's organised by the HEI. And placement is assessed in conjunction with the placement provider. Whereas in the apprenticeship, we have approximately 1,000 hours per year organised by the employer, working with other service providers to ensure that range of placement. The HEI is still involved in that placement because they're going to be regularly visiting apprentices, visiting you, whether that's virtual or live. There'll probably be a mix, but but you can see that's huge differences. So we're looking at perhaps 4,000 hours of clinical experience compared to 500 hours. And that's the real difference, that our apprentices will graduate and be very experienced in doing what they're doing within the role. Typically in the traditional BSc, we've got 4 days a week in the HEI versus 1 day for the apprenticeship. However, the amount of academic credits that they have to pass is the same in both. There are differences in funding, obviously. With our traditional BSc students, they self-fund, and they do get a £5,000 a year training grant at the moment. Whereas for our apprentices, they'll be employed by their organisation. At the end of the programme, there is an expectation on the apprenticeship route that the Band 5 role will be available, and that they will stay with your organisation into their newly qualified practitioner role, Band 5 role. Whereas in the traditional BSc, they will look for work at the point of qualification. Can we move to the next slide? So on this slide, I just thought I'd give you a flavour of how we went through that process of working out how do we fit all that learning into 1 day a week, when in a traditional route we've got 4 days a week. And clearly the way that happens is a lot more learning is done within the practice setting. So these, the first column that says duties, the standard talks about duties, and these are the job duties. And I've given you an example of 2 there. The first one is interpret and apply research, participate in the development and execution of service evaluation, audit and or research projects related to day-to-day practice. So as part of their apprenticeship role, then your apprentice may be involved in that type of activity. However, to reach the degree standard, they will need to learn about research methodologies. So in the next column, the expected off-the-job activity, that's the time they'd spend in HEI. They are going to learn about methodologies. They're going to learn the science and the theory behind those activities based in the HEI. And I did this one for Manchester Met when we were putting in our figures for the funding band. And I said we'd need across the programme, across the 4 years, about 15 days of learning based in the HEI. If we look at the next section, produce and manage records, I don't think they're going to need as much from me at the HEI, because they're going to be doing that as part of their daily job. And it's a much more practical skill-based activity. So they're still going to get some HEI understanding of those wider policy frameworks, but much of that activity will happen within the learning that happens in your department rather than in the classroom. So for something like that particular duty, I've only said there are 5 days of required learning. And HEIs went through that process of looking at how we might apportion what, if we've only got 20%, what is best done in the HEI and what is best done in practice, and try and work out how that would allow us to make sure the standard is maintained and the students have the right level of support whilst working as apprentices as well. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So just a few key points. The apprentices in that model of learning will absolutely need support from the employer. They will have an allocated mentor, and we're expecting that application of theory into practice. And very often they'll come with the practice and we'll be adding the theory in the HEI. They will be embedded in your culture. You will have more flexibility in creating that work and learning context to plan for your organisation which duties are most important for them to get moving on and how you support that learning. And finally, the apprentice will need access to that full range of learning and practice experiences across different types. So it will help where organisations can work together to be able to provide that. I know that was a whistle-stop tour, but I'm going to move on to Victoria and hand over to her.
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm Victoria Lundy and I'm Joint Course Lead for the BSc Speech and Language Therapy degree at Birmingham City University. And I've been part of the Trailblazer group since it was born, if you like, in 2017. And at BCU, we're extremely interested in delivering the SLT apprenticeship route, which is why I'm here today presenting to you all. So as Berenice has already alluded to, for a while it's now felt a little bit like the chicken and egg analogy, and what I mean by that is it feels very much like employers to some extent have been waiting for HEIs to make the first move in terms of committing to a start date and a model of delivery for an apprenticeship route, but also the HEIs have been waiting for employers to make the first move in terms of the development of a business proposal and provision of numbers to indicate commitment to the apprenticeship route. And what we've come to see really is that although technically apprenticeships are employer-led, and they are, however, both the employer and HEIs have a joint responsibility to ensure that we can progress this route. And so we can't wait for each other to make the first move. And so what I really hope is that today will be a real pivotal point in moving this forward for the profession. And so what I'm going to try and outline in the next few slides is a differentiation from an HEI perspective between the roles of each sector in moving this process forward. And I think many of the points I'm going to outline have already been covered to some extent. However, hopefully it'll be useful to see this from an HEI perspective. Okay, so I'm going to start with the next steps for the HEI. So first of all, in May or June, so very, very soon, the national procurement process for SLT will be launched. And HEIs, such as ourselves, who are committed to the development of this route, will be encouraged to engage with this process. So that's so we can ensure that as an education provider, we're meeting NHS standards, as well as other standards, and that the route is a viable option for the HEI and the employers. Employers can then identify an HEI to collaborate with, and that will mean that a contract between providers and NHS employers, as well as other employers, can be set up. And so that means NHS employees don't have to carry out their own procurement process. HEIs will, of course, have a responsibility to liaise with employers, to share and gather information, as well as problem solve jointly throughout the process. HEIs will also be working with independent providers, and I know regionally we've had a huge interest from independent providers in the apprenticeship route, and I know that there are many here today. HEIs are really ready to receive data from employers outlining their forecasts for employment of apprentices, and I think this is something that I will be coming on to this in more detail in the next slide, why this information is so important for us. HEIs, as mentioned right at the beginning of the morning, will be working closely with regional apprenticeship managers. For us in the Midlands region, this is Liz Sahu, and following the procurement process, Liz will be helping us to organise a regional event for employers and other interested parties that will be similar to this event today, but more focused on regional priorities and getting those collaborations really off the ground and moving from a regional perspective. And I would envisage similar regional events happening around the country moving forward. The HEI will need to complete the HCPC approval request form, and this will notify HCPC of our intention to develop the route. And this in itself has been known to be quite a lengthy process. So when employers ask the HEIs, when's the start date? To some extent, we're reliant on other processes as to when that will be. And I know historically HCPC approval has taken up to 18 months. However, I know as an HEI who already delivers SLT degree programmes, this should be much quicker for ourselves. The HEI, a huge task, as Julia's mentioned, is for us to look at our curriculum development and look at models of delivery. And that model of delivery will be both within and outside of the workplace. And we as an HEI need to think about how this fits in with our existing provision. So at BCU, we have a BSc and an MSc route as well as a part-time route. And we need to think about how an apprenticeship route would fit in with our existing provision, but also meet the needs of employers in terms of their business proposals and how they see the structure of the curriculum. But obviously there'll be a diverse, perspective in how those models of delivery would best suit different organisations. So ultimately what we've got to really think about is how the curriculum can be best delivered in order to meet HCPC SOPs, the curriculum guidance and learning outcomes for the courses and the modules. The HEI also have to complete an internal approval process, and at BCU that's called the PAC process, Partnership Approval Process, where we will submit our proposal including costings to an internal panel, and within this application we have to include data for employers outlining their proposed numbers for recruitment into the apprenticeship route. And so that's why to some extent there is, well, to a huge extent there is this reliance on this data from employers from an HEI perspective. Okay, so moving on to an employer, the employer kind of role, and I'm aware that we've already had a presentation from Carmel D and Michelle, but I hope I'm adding to this now is our perspective as an HEI working with employers, but I very much feel it complements what's already been discussed. So to start with, as we've heard from different sectors, it's essential for employers to identify key people they can work with. And I feel that the establishment of the bodies that can help us in pushing forward this route is becoming much clearer actually now in the recent months. And so this will be making links at our local, regional and national levels. So every organisation has an apprenticeship lead or unit, and this resource is there to help you with the internal process, as well as signposting you to other support networks where necessary. Service leads will also be instrumental in supporting development of business proposals within your organisation. At a regional level, it's important to make links with AHP councils and faculties as we've mentioned. I've personally found it really difficult to get my head around how all of these different bodies fit in with each other and how they work together. However, I know that recently HE have produced some short animations describing the roles of different groups, and so you might find these interesting to look at to help you understand how the different systems and councils and bodies work. I know Elaine mentioned at the start of the morning that these would be an excellent resource to support you moving forward, as there are very people working at quite a strategic level who sit within these organisations. And of course, nationally, we have RCSLT as a resource who can signpost you to relevant people and organisations for your area, as well as the forum that's been recently launched. Employers will need to look at the development of a business proposal, which we've mentioned, which will address recruitment and retention challenges, as well as actively thinking about diversifying the workforce by a consideration of different routes, such as the apprenticeship route. And this proposal will be very much in line, of course, with trust workforce strategies, as well as regional and national HEE workforce transformation plans. So the information, as I've said, that will be provided to HEIs will need to be look at apprenticeship numbers for the immediate future, as well as a forecast for numbers to ensure that we have a route that's sustainable, which I have no doubt it will be. And so it's really important that we have this information, as I say, so we can engage with our internal apprenticeship routes. And as Michelle mentioned, I'd like to, this is a good point to thank Jenny Glynn, who is an SLT service lead within the West Midlands working for Dudley NHS group. And she has also been part of the Trailblazer group. And our collaboration as an HEI with Jenny has been really critical in helping us problem solve and think about forward planning for the apprenticeship route as a trailblazer group, but also I know within the West Midlands as well. So I think, as Michelle mentioned, it's really important employers and HEIs are working together and networking to share knowledge and ideas, to problem solve and forward plan for when the apprenticeship is up and running. So some of these considerations will be, as we'll move on to in the second workshop, thinking about balanced placement provision. And to some extent, this will be facilitated by the HEI. However, things such as rotational placements will need to be agreed amongst employers. Employers can also perhaps work together to think about capacity for and different models of supervision and consider how to effectively facilitate work-based study time. And it will be really essential for employers to look at their existing workforce in helping with problem solving, for example, to ensure that there is a skill mix in place to support apprentices really effectively. And as Berenice mentioned, employers must really remember that they obviously have access to that levy, therefore there is already funding secured for this route and the employment of apprentices within NHS organisations. So as you can see, there's a huge amount of work to do, but it's a really exciting time. And although the HEIs and employers do have quite distinctive roles and jobs to do to some extent, their roles do, of course, also overlap. So it's really important that moving forward at a national and regional level that we're keeping these communication channels open, we're networking and we're working collaboratively to ensure that we can keep the momentum going and really establish this as a viable and sustainable route into the profession. Thank you. And I'm now going to hand over to Annabelle.
Actually, you're handing over to Rachel Brown at the University of Essex, and I'll be handing over to Annabelle and Nikki later on in our presentation. If you could move forward to the next slide, please, that would be fantastic. So what we thought at the University of Essex is we use this part of the presentation to give you an idea about the development process we're currently going through in developing a speech and language therapy apprenticeship at the university, and the consultation and collaboration we've had with employers and also our existing BSc students to ensure that we're developing a programme that hopefully will meet the needs of the SLT community and help with the workforce development planning and strategic direction in that area. What I wanted to do initially, though, was just to give you a little bit of background about Essex and the fact that we've been delivering apprenticeships since 2016, starting in the area of healthcare assistant practitioner and registered nursing. So we've got a little bit of experience about apprenticeships, even though we're in the process of developing the SLT apprenticeship and we're in that learning curve that everybody is in that particular sector. Some of you will know, as part of the apprenticeship process, we also have to undergo Ofsted inspections, and the university was inspected as a good provider in February 2019, which we're exceedingly proud of because it shows the quality of the provision and the training that we deliver to our employers and to the apprentices that they employ. I think it's also keen to stress that as a higher education institute, our main objective is to support employers with the whole apprenticeship process. So that's from application and right through to the completion of the apprenticeship. It is very much a three-way relationship when it comes to delivering apprenticeships. And so we are there to support both you as an employer and also your apprentice through that process of completing the apprenticeship. Could you move to the next slide, please? Okay, so this just gives you a little bit of indication of the provision that we currently deliver so that it shows that familiarity that we have with apprenticeships. We've been delivering the healthcare assistant practitioner, as I said, since 2016. And what we've introduced, which will become available in October 2021, is an occupational therapy and speech and language therapy route within the healthcare assistant practitioner. Now, Annabelle and Nikki will go into much more detail about how that healthcare assistant practitioner is a key aspect of the speech and language therapy that we are also in the developing at the moment. And we also have the registered nurse, the psychological wellbeing, and the advanced clinical practitioner experience of apprenticeships. Could we move to the next slide, please? And this is just talking about the scope that we're hoping to develop over the coming years in terms of apprenticeship provision, with a huge focus being put on those areas of health and social care. So we're looking at occupational therapy alongside speech and language therapy, the nursing associate, and also the physiotherapy degree apprenticeship. Could we move to the next slide, please? Now, there's been a lot of discussion, especially from our colleagues at Health Education England, about the funding of apprenticeships. So I won't go into this because it takes too much time, but just to say that we will, as an HEI, be there to support you, whether you are a levy paying employer or a non-levy paying employer. And I know from the discussions we've had with a whole wide range of speech and language therapists, from NHS Trust through to private practice, that sometimes there's confusion as to who is a levy paying employer and who isn't. So we can support you with that. And I'm also aware that not all organisations, not all employers have apprenticeship leads. And so in some instances, you've got no experience of apprenticeships at all. And if you do embark on a speech and language therapy apprenticeship, it will be your first dip in the apprenticeship ocean. And so we are there very much to hold your hand. Okay, could you move to the next slide, and then also to the next slide? Thank you. So, as I said, we are here very much to support our employers. We meet with employers prior to every apprenticeship being organised and every employer taking on an apprentice. And over the last few months, since the university mentioned that it was going to be developing a speech and language therapy apprenticeship, we've had a whole range of different employers contacting us, wanting to know more about the provision that we are thinking of developing. So we've gone in, and many of the people who are here today we've actually already spoken to, and they'll know that our key priority is to support those employers in the development of the apprenticeship that they have within their organisation. Apologies for the background noise if you can hear it. There's something going on outside, so apologies. We will also support you through the contracting process, which will be different depending on whether you're a large NHS trust or a small private provider. We can support you through that procurement process, that contracting process. We'll also support you through the development of your apprenticeship digital account, which every employer has to have these days, which links then to the individual learner record for each apprentice. Now, for some, you will already have got that set up. The NHS Trust, there will already be their digital apprenticeship account set up, but for the smaller independent organisations, you won't have that. And again, that's another area that we can support you with. And it's the key is the tripartite relationship between the university, the employer and their apprentice. That's what makes apprenticeships work, and that has to be a very strong relationship from day one. So we will be able to support you in that area. Right, I'm now going to hand over to Nikki, which will go on to the exciting bits, which is what our course is actually going to be potentially looking like over the coming years.
Thank you, Rachel. So my name is Nikki Williamson. I'm the lead for apprenticeships within the School of Health and Social Care at the University of Essex. So one of the things I thought that we would be able to share with you today is some of our experiences of working but also learning together, both internally within the university and within the school, as well as externally with our practice partners. So yeah. In terms of how we've been sort of taking that forward, we currently, as Rachel kindly provided an overview, have been working with our existing programmes within the school around apprenticeship and looking at how they've been delivering their programmes, but also really carefully working with our programme leads, our divisional leads, our directors of education, our apprenticeship team, key departments in the university, as well as our stakeholders, our local employers, our practice partners, our students, as Rachel mentioned earlier. And we also have a service user reference group within the school who we've been able to learn from some of their experiences and look at how we can inform the development of our apprenticeship programmes. So one of the things that we have been exploring as a school, but also in terms of the development of the speech and language therapy program, is the different variations in program delivery across our existing programs. So thinking about what is the length of program, how will we be delivering the apprenticeship itself. So some of our programs have day release, which could be 1 or potentially 2 days a week. And also we have block release as well. So not just in terms of placements, but also our registered nurse program delivers as a block release. So we've been trying to learn from what's currently happening within our programs, and also thinking about the different academic levels as we're delivering programs from level 5 as our healthcare assistant practitioner program up to our advanced clinical practitioner program as level 7. So we've very much been working together and learning from the experiences that each of the programs have had in terms of the apprentice's journey through those programs as well. So one of the key elements that has been coming up in conversations today and others have spoken about is in terms of placements and how we work with our practice partners and our employers to look at the delivery of placements. And again, that's the model in which different programs deliver that can differ between the different programs. Next slide, please. And so throughout the development of the programs, we have been working closely with the university, like Victoria mentioned within her talk, the different internal processes that we have to undertake, but also very closely with our professional and regulatory bodies. And some of that learning has also been from our registered nurse program that have undertaken their approval processes to successful delivery of programs, but also in terms of some of the changes that are occurring within the requirements around apprenticeship standards. So the apprentice, we've been considering the apprentice role, but if you think about that in terms of the apprentice's journey, and so learning from experiences that existing apprentices have had and talking to them about those experiences, but also thinking about the differences between our existing, if you like, standard programs and the apprentices and how they might work together. And also in terms of the work-based learning support and helping employers think about how that support can link with the development of their knowledge throughout the programme. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand over to Annabelle just to offer the example of our proposed delivery of speech and language therapy to demonstrate how we're bringing, drawing upon our other programmes within the School of Health and Social Care. Annabelle, over to you.
Thank you. So linking in right back to the beginning of this morning, and also to the more recent presentations we've had that looked at length of programme, we have, or we are constructing, I should say, so it's all subject to our validation, but wanted to construct something that drew on our existing provision and also was very flexible for the apprentice and the employer. And our proposed delivery is therefore to work with our existing foundation degree of the 1 day a week and the Introduction to SLT module, which is detailed here. So to try and give a little bit more information about that, what we have in the top-up degree particularly is that let's start that again. So we have the 2-year top-up degree, which you'll notice a difference in between the 1 day a week for the healthcare assistant practitioner that's proposed or that is already being delivered, and the 2 days a week. So how that fits in terms of the timing is we'd still anticipate it being a 4-year programme, but within that, they have these 2 different levels of learning time, protected learning time. So we say 2 days a week, but that is encompassed within protected learning time. So for example, in one of the workshop groups that we were in, we were talking about study leave versus what is taught, and Julie talked about how they've looked at mapping their curriculum and what number of days would be required per module or per criterion. So ours would be 2 days a week of protected learning time, but within that there will be built-in time for self-study. And that's also part of the apprenticeship rules, is that we can't require apprentices to go and do lots of extra self-study outside of the days that they're in work or in learning time with the university. If I could go to, I'm just wondering actually, Nikki, we've got 3 minutes, so should we hop on to the next slide?
Yeah, no problem at all. So in terms of the healthcare assistant practitioner, this really just gives you an overview of the existing programme. So it enables people who maybe haven't been to university for some time or don't have the level of qualifications that are required to go directly into speech and language therapy programme, that they can have any level 3 qualification with their level 2 English and maths as part of that. And so the first 2 years would be undertaking the healthcare assistant programme, as Annabelle said, 1 day a week on campus. The end of year 1, there's 8 taster days in practice, which gives the apprentice an opportunity to explore other areas of practice that are of interest to them. Next slide, please. And then in year 2, as was mentioned, there's a specific role-specific module that can be undertaken. So we currently have the registered nurse module, which is around acute intervention and rehabilitation. And from October this year, we've had approved the introduction to occupational therapy and speech and language therapy module, which will provide that pathway into the proposed programme. Next slide, please. And so this just gives you an indication, a visual indication of how the programme might look. So we already have validated healthcare assistant practitioner programme and foundation degree, and we already have our validated BSc honours speech and language therapy programme. So we're looking to validate a 2-year speech and language therapy apprenticeship, which would be 2 days a week with block placement. Next slide, please. So just to mention our next steps that I think other people have spoken about as well, in terms of talking to your organisations and also learning development of apprenticeship leads within your employing organisations, but also the local HEIs to help you move forward within the development of your apprenticeship. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you all, and thank you for bringing that in just right on 11:55. Thank you, everybody, and welcome back to the final moment. I have been invited to draw out some key themes from what we've heard, which I think is going to be interesting. I suppose what I would say is all of the comments that you've made in the chat will be recorded. Everything you've put on the Jamboard will be recorded. So none of those comments or questions will be lost, and we will come to them all in due course. I think my own reflection, thinking about where the RCSLT goes next, falls under 3 broad headings. The first would be really around shaping and organising the local market in each region, whether we say there are 10, although there was some discussion, for example, of West and East Midlands working together. We've got universities who in many cases are keen to offer an apprenticeship, but will need to be assured that there are a sufficient cohort for them to be able to be financially viable for a given number of years. And then we've got a bunch of employers who are keen to offer apprenticeships, but no one by themselves will be able to do that cohort. So it's the holding of the ring between the RCSLT, HEE, universities and the employers to generate a cohort which gives sufficient confidence to the university to push the button on the course. And how we work all of that through, that will then link to the second bundle of issues, which are around working through the practicalities. So we had a lot, particularly for small independent employers, saying, we're going to need support here to work through how we do the placement rotation. But also the second bundle of issues, which was essentially, as these things always are, about the money. There was a point when we began all this, I remember, where we innocently imagined that apprenticeships would all be supernumerary. Yeah, and we were saying, look, this is not a way of reducing your staffing budget. This is a way of increasing the diversity of the talent pool that you were drawing from. Now we hear that in very few cases, if any, are things going to be supernumerary. The smaller the organisational, the smaller the team, the greater that challenge that creates for access. and for how this is just funded overall. So that's that second bundle of issues, which, you know, there will be good practice. We heard a lot from colleagues in physio and OT about the journey they've already been on, but in many cases, those are bigger teams which have a greater ability to spread the load than an SLT team that may be smaller. So that was the second thing. And I think the third thing, which I heard coming through pretty strongly, is about the AHP dimension. Now, I live in a world where I have to think UK-wide, I have to think for nation, and always be devolution friendly. This morning's session, because it's around apprenticeships, is gloriously, unapologetically England only. And in that respect, we can think about the new architecture of STPs becoming integrated care systems. And I heard strong messages around work that AHP faculties are already beginning to do, and the extent to which AHP faculties may have a role in apprenticeship planning across the allied health professions as we move forward. And I think we need to get our heads around that as well. So those are, I think, the three big things that I've drawn, but all of the things that people have mentioned will be taken forward and included. I thank you all for coming. I would say we are about, if it hasn't already happened, we are shortly going to send around a poll, which I think will compare and contrast whether people feel more confident now than they did at the start of the morning. I don't know whether there's any intention, events colleagues, to say what the poll was at the beginning and the poll at the end, whether we're going to be able to do those results live in real time. We'll come back to that. In the meanwhile, it falls to me to thank all of the presenters. I have a long list here, which says Elaine, Jennifer, Berenice, Kamal, Michelle, Dee, Victoria, Julie, Rachel, and Nikki. And if you're not on that list, our apologies, and please do consider yourself also duly thanked. My events colleagues would really, really like you to fill in the evaluation forms that you'll receive, because obviously we are in a new world here, I guess, of doing events virtually, and you know, we're still finding our way. We hope that you found this morning's session useful, constructive. The tech has worked, I think, very well, with thanks to our events colleagues, but we are on, as I said, a journey of learning about online events. So your evaluation would be really, really helpful to us. I would say there's a shift from 2 to 4. Yeah, 3 is still winning, but what was 2 earlier is now, you know, we've gone from an average of 3 to an average of 3.5. I'll take that as a win. So thank you to, I can see comments are still coming in the chat, so we'll leave that open for a little longer. Actually, it's 12:51. So Becca and Kaylee, have I forgotten anything on the close down housekeeping?
No, I think that's everything. Thank you all so very much for coming.
Okay, in that case, thanks again. This will continue to be enormous. Dee, you mentioned it. I think there are a number of us who are now hoping to see qualified apprenticeships before we retire. It's been a long journey, but I hope you agree it's been worth it. And I leave you with 9 minutes of your life back that you didn't expect to get. Thank you all very much for your time.